Hello and welcome to the Love Energetics podcast. This is the space where science, spirituality, and mindset work come together with the mission of empowering you to reach your full potential and live the life you daydream about. I'm your host, Marea, a scientifically trained intuitive, neuroscience expert, and manifestation coach that shares the knowledge and tools that will ascend you to the highest levels of growth and expansion. If you're ready to leave a life of settling, soul-crushing limitations and playing small, then this is the perfect place for you. It's time to begin your journey of unconditional self-love, effortless confidence, and soul-led success that alchemizes your trauma and ascends you to your highest potential. And with that, let's get into today's podcast episode, which is all about how you can use astrology to completely transform your life based on everything that I did and how astrology personally helped me transform my own life. This is a really cool episode, and if you are watching this, you might know it's a slightly different setup. I'm a big fan of like Christmas and lighting the Christmas tree. I even have like a cute little like background, one of those YouTube backgrounds that has like a cute little Christmas tree, a fireplace, and it's in like a cute little, snowy village. I just like, whenever I'm working from home and like it's so cold outside, being on the East Coast over here, this just like with the lighting and the cute little background, I just feel so cozy, curled up with my electric blanket and just hanging out. So I decided I would just show you like my little backdrop here and kind of change up the scenery a bit. So if you're not watching this, feel free to go head over to YouTube because that's where I post the video podcast version. But anyways, let's get back to the topic. So I was inspired to make this podcast episode today because last week I taught basically like a full moon workshop. I went to a spa and wellness type of center and I led a full moon workshop in honor of the Gemini full moon. It was the last full moon of the year, and it really kind of brought me back to when I initially went through my spiritual awakening 5 going on 6 years ago at this point, and just how I brought astrology into that spiritual awakening process and just how much it really helped me up level at a much more accelerated pace. Like I really was able to kind of go back to my roots and really reflect on why using astrology for manifestation and healing and rewiring purposes is really so powerful. And I thought, wow, what better opportunity than now to share that with you guys, especially if you are newer to the spiritual manifesting world, or, you kind of know a little bit about it, but you really want to like find some type of way to be really consistent and committed to like a new up-leveling routine for 2026. You just really want to have a solid quantum leap year. Then this is the perfect podcast episode for you, because basically in this episode, I'm going to be talking all about what I did and how it transformed my life and how you can do it too. You'll leave this podcast episode knowing exactly what to do to use astrology combined with manifestation, shadow work, healing work, and exactly what to do going forward so that you can up-level and transform your life at an accelerated pace. And so that's kind of like my little introduction. And so now I'm going to start to kind of go into basically explaining all the components of this. So I would say if you go back, if you haven't already listened to the first episode of, I talk about my story in my first ever episode of this podcast, but I also talk a little bit more about my story in my first podcast episode of this second season. It's like titled, where I've been, what I've been up to. I talk a little bit more about like my spiritual awakening, how that began, and why I started Marea Manifest and all that stuff. So you'll hear a little bit more about, my spiritual awakening and how I got into manifestation and all of that in that first podcast episode. But just to kind of give you a quick understanding of that to tie into how I started using astrology and manifestation, I'll just share that. So after I got my hip surgery in January 2021, that was really the rock bottom type of moment for me. I was kind of already like heading down that path and just really at the point where I was willing to try anything to just change my life at that point, which is such a great place to be. Mind you, I've probably said that before, but that is the best time to really do such a drastic change on your life, because you're so in the opposite direction that you're willing to do anything to move forward. Typically when we're like in an okay place, we're not as motivated to change. So if you are in your own rock bottom moment, it's a great place to be, especially closing out 2025 and starting 2026. So that's just like one little tidbit, but so that's where I was, and that's when I started really learning about manifestation and just mindset work, spirituality, like how the mind works, how we manifest from our subconscious. I dove into all of that stuff, and along with that, I also started to go down a manifestation type of rabbit hole, essentially. Not manifestation. I started to go into an astrology type of rabbit hole as well, because I found that kind of tied in really well. A lot of people would talk about, a lot of astrologists would talk about, kind of like horoscopy type of things on TikTok and things like that. Like if you're a Capricorn rising, this is what's coming up for you in the month of May. Or if, this is what you should manifest for the full moon in Gemini or the full moon in Capricorn or whatever, or the new moon, I should say. And I'll talk about the difference between the new moon and the full moon in a minute. But anyway, I started to see those types of videos, and it really piqued my interest because, I knew about astrology. Obviously, I feel like kind of everybody has a little bit of insight into astrology, but, I was curious to learn more. And so that's basically what I did in my, era of being bedridden, recovering from hip surgery. I had nothing but time to learn everything I wanted to know. And, I've just always been somebody that loves to learn. I've always been a lifelong learner, really big in personal development, tying into the astrology that makes sense based on my Gemini sun sign and my Capricorn rising, all of that stuff, which I wouldn't have known if I didn't go down this journey, right? It helped me learn a lot, understand more about myself. So that's why one of the reasons I love astrology, combined with all of the spirituality, manifestation type of work. So I started to learn a lot more about astrology at a deeper level, because I think a lot of us probably relate to this, but remember when, if you're a girl or a woman like me, you probably grew up with the Cosmo magazines being really big, and they always had the horoscopes in there, and I loved checking my horoscope every month for Gemini, because that's my sun sign. I was always like, ooh, what's gonna happen this month, blah 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 blah, right? But when it came down to it, I always knew those were very general. It just didn't make sense. I was like, all right, yeah, not everybody who's a Gemini is going to be going through the same life changes this month. And, I was a Gemini, or I am a Gemini, and my mom is a Gemini, and we are not really alike in a lot of ways, I would say. And based on the description of a Gemini, I always did really resonate with the sun sign, but not every capacity. And I knew that my mom didn't really seem as much like a Gemini. So there was just missing pieces, kind of going back to the theme of why I shared I went through my spiritual awakening round 2 in that episode I just mentioned of where I've been. I was missing pieces, right? And so whenever I'm missing pieces, I'm motivated to learn more, to really understand all the components and get the full picture, so that I know, I'm not just getting misinformation or, taking one piece and leaving out the other pieces to really fully understand something. I always want to know everything to know, so that I can really use it to benefit my life. Because if you don't really know every piece, it's not going to benefit your life as much as if you knew all the components, right? It's just it's the whole recipe thing, right, that we talk about a lot with manifestation. If you are when you're baking, you're missing a piece of the recipe, whatever you're baking is not going to come out correct, right? So you need all of the components for everything, and astrology is the same. You can't just go off your sun sign. You can't just go off your rising sign. You need to look at all the components of your birth chart and all of that stuff. And if you guys want, I guess, a deeper dive into more about the birth chart and your 3 main signs, which is the sun sign, the moon sign, and the rising sign, I can definitely talk more about that. I could talk about a lot of stuff. I'm very, very well versed in astrology. I don't really refer to myself as an astrologer because, my my main work is being a transformation coach, using intuitive channeling and just being more in the neuroscience, spirituality, kind of energetic space. That's really more where my main passion and skill set lies. And, astrology is really just a tool for me. It's not the end all be all of everything, but it is really powerful if you use it in the right way. I am very knowledgeable on the topic. If you guys want to know more about that, we can absolutely dive into it. But today, what I really want to focus on is how I used astrology that first year of my spiritual awakening that helped me completely transform my life. And partially the birth chart was helpful in that, but the other major component that I'm really going to dive in deeper today, because that's what's going to give you like the most tangible thing that you could take away from this podcast and start doing right away, is using the full moons and the new moons and just some of the astrological transits to help you with healing, up-leveling, and manifesting and creating, intentionally creating your own life. So that's kind of my spiel on that. So, so I started learning everything there was to know, right? And I did start to learn a lot about, I feel like, understanding my birth chart and learning all of the different components of that really, really helped me have a better understanding of who I was and who I wasn't, basically. And, I've talked about this before, right? A lot of times we think we're something, but we're actually not. It's usually programming from society or, how you were raised, or it's a result of like a trauma response of something that happened to you that you made mean something about you, but it's not really you. Like, for example, people in my family say this a lot. It's kind of an excuse for behavior, is like not changing behavior is like, oh, that's just how I am. An example of thinking that you're something that you're not, say that you tend to kind of lash out at people a lot of the times, right? Like if somebody disagrees with you, you lash out and you get really angry. Sometimes people might think, oh, that's just how I am, right? I'm a very passionate person. I speak my mind. I don't hold anything back. And yeah, I can tend to be a little angry. That's just how I am. That's not really who you are at your core. It's actually just, it's trauma responses to feeling like you're not being heard. It's a lack of emotional mastery and not being able to really control or understand your emotions, kind of letting things bottle up to the point where you do really get really angry. It's not who you are, if that makes sense. It's not your personality. You're not an angry person. You've just learned to be angry as a result of unhealed wounds and programming, and just you made it mean something about you when it's really just something that you've developed, if that makes sense. So going back to the birth chart astrology piece, I felt like learning more about my sun, my moon, my rising sign, and a couple other placements as well, that really helped me understand more about who I am and who I'm not, because I resonated with certain things and didn't resonate with other things. And now that I've really developed my intuition, which that's a whole nother podcast topic that I will be coming out with, I can really intuitively look in to see what parts of the Gemini I really align with and what parts I don't, and how my rising sign interacts with my sun sign and all of that, because it's not a one size fits all. I don't display every trait of a Gemini. I don't display every trait of a Capricorn just because I'm a Capricorn rising, but I have pieces of those things. And so when you combine, like I said, astrology alone isn't nearly as powerful as when you combine it with this other spiritual work that I teach. So combining with intuition is even more powerful. But, when I was really in the early stages, I didn't hone my intuition to be actually a skill set that I am, making more of a science and being able to use it at an extremely accurate and precise level. So back then I kind of just used like my inner knowing that I just naturally felt, where, I would learn about a Gemini, being a lifelong learner, for example, really loving to kind of stimulate the mind. A Gemini is a very heady, mind-focused sign because it's ruled by the planet Mercury. So Mercury rules, your thoughts, your beliefs, your written and verbal communication, a lot of that stuff. So it tends to be a little bit more of a heady sign. And so I know that I really aligned with that. I really aligned with, loving to kind of hone in my communication skills. That's always been something I've really enjoyed and something that really led me to my corporate career in HR. I loved to kind of basically use people skills to bring into the business aspect. So one of my favorite things to do in my HR role was to coach leaders on how to lead their teams better, how to have employees, feel more fulfilled in their job, things like that, using my communication skills to help others. That shows me how I align with my Gemini sun, for example. So you can kind of see things like that. I would also say that certain signs, if you're an unhealed person, in the sense of you haven't really done a lot of inner work, you may display some of the shadow perceived negative traits of a sign more than the positive ones. So that's something you can also look into as well. Again, I can talk about more of that on a deeper level. I don't want to get too off pace with that. For example, a Gemini has a bad rep of being two-faced. Maybe if you lack the inner work, you haven't done the inner work, and you have more unhealed wounds and trauma responses, and that's how your personality is developed, maybe you might have the tendency to act one way with one person and a different way with another person. And that's kind of because the Gemini is a mutable sign. It's the sign of the twins. You tend to have a lot of duality in who you are. You can be really adaptable. You could be really versatile. You can kind of have a lot of different multifaceted parts of you. And if you are not doing the healing work, you may display that in more of an unaligned way. And that's why Geminis can get that bad rep. As someone who has done the healing work, I'm very aware of, things that I need to work on, things that feel out of alignment with me, or when I'm acting out of a way from an ego-based thing, or, a self-image wound or something like that. I'm very aware of all that stuff. And now that I've done a lot of work on myself, I can see that looking back, it made sense that I kind of fit that mold or that category, because I actually had a lot of different types of friends. Even to this day, I have multiple different types of different friend groups from different walks of life. I, as a person, I've went through a lot of identity transformations and shifts. There's been so many different versions of me, things like that. So I can kind of really understand how the Gemini traits have manifested for me throughout my life. So there's so many different things that I can go in about that stuff. If you want me to do a separate episode about the healed and unhealed traits of each sign, I could totally do that. I feel like that would be a really fun one, actually. So let me know. Going back to, sometimes I go too far down a tangent, and I'm like, wait, what am I talking about again? So going back to what I did that first year, right? So I did get a better understanding of my birth chart, like I've just laid out to you guys. So that was one piece. But the other thing was I started to create practices around the new moon and the full moon, and kind of use that energy for my healing transformation journey and my manifestation journey, as I learned to manifest, as I learned to do the shadow work and the inner work and the identity shifting and all of that stuff. I really combined it with the astrological transits, mainly the lunar ones. But, as time went on, I did take the Mercury retrogrades into account, the Venus retrograde, the Saturn retrograde, all that stuff. I also took that into account. Especially Saturn returns, a big one too that you probably have heard of. I definitely made a video on that I don't know where it is, probably on my TikTok. I could definitely talk about it more, but because when I made that video, it was when I was like 28. So it was based on, I know my chart, like I said, really well. I knew I was entering my Saturn return because it usually lasts about a year and a half, 2 years, and kind of ends around 30. So it depends on what your Saturn is in. So like my Saturn was in Pisces. So anyone who is my age also has a Saturn in Pisces. They go through their Saturn return at the same time. So it's usually between 28 and 30. So I made that video about Saturn return when I was going into it. But now that 2 years later, I am 30 and I've come out of my Saturn return, I learned so much. Oh my God. Like this past year, really, like the second half of my Saturn return was a friggin' doozy in a good way, obviously, but there were challenges and a lot of identity shifts and growth for sure. But I feel like I can refresh the Saturn return thing too, maybe even make an episode on that. Just coming up with all these new podcast episodes on the spot right now, but I feel like that would be really cool. So yeah, cool little thought, clock that. Going back to the new moon and the full moon cycles, we're finally getting into it, right? So once I started learning about astrology and using these transits, using the energy behind these transits, I started doing it consistently. And so before I explain more about the new moon and the full moon, like the practices I did, I actually want to explain, like provide a foundation of the energy in astrology and why you want to utilize it, because I think that would be really helpful foundation to have before I go into the second part, because I want to give you guys all the pieces, right? I don't want to give you missing pieces. And that's why my podcasts usually tend to be really long. So sorry. Hopefully you enjoy it. And if you do, let me know. I would love to hear. I'd also say if you are really curious about your birth chart and understanding your signs and how it relates to you, how the qualities and traits of those zodiac signs in your chart have manifested in your own personality, I do a personal birth chart reading. It's called Born to Be, Built to Do. I will link it in the show notes of this podcast. I do a lot more than just the birth chart reading. So I give you a full, very detailed birth chart reading, but I also combine it with intuition. So I'm able to really channel more of the information you need to hear about your blueprint, all of those traits, how they manifest, what you could look like in the future, how those traits can manifest in the future based on, doing inner work, doing identity shifting, how maybe some of those traits are unhealed wounds, manifested kind of in that way. It's programming, what's really you, what's not, what you're meant to do, who you're meant to be. I really look into a lot of reading your energetic field and talking with your higher self. And so I really take the astrology birth chart readings to an incredibly new level. I don't really see people do that. That's something that I feel like is a little bit more unique, but I feel like, again, is giving you the full picture versus just going off astrology. We're combining it with your energetic blueprint as well. So if you're interested, you can either find that link in the show notes or head over to my website and go to my offerings and you'll find it there. It's called Born to Be, Built to Do. So I just wanted to give you that option in case you didn't want to wait for the next podcast episode to come out. You didn't want to just kind of sift through all the different signs. You wanted to know really super specific, tailored information to you. That is the best place to do it. So more information there. Back to providing the astrological foundation, right? So basically my favorite way to look at the astrological transits, what's going on, is I like to call it an astrological forecast. And basically it's because the astrological energy reminds me of the weather in a sense. So if you think about it, the weather affects the collective, all of us as individuals, right? So everybody in, the Northeast, for example, experiences winter. For example, if I live in New York City, me and the rest of the New York City residents are going to experience the same weather, right? We're being affected by the same weather forecast. Same thing happens with us with the astrological forecast. We're all affected by the collective energy, but the way we're affected is at different levels, right? And that depends on your birth chart, your unique signs. So just a quick explanation of what that would mean is, I would say Mercury retrograde tends to affect people with a lot of heavy Gemini and Virgo placements, because Gemini and Virgo are ruled by Mercury. So hi, Gemini, born during a retrograde. So I think for a long time, I felt very affected by Mercury retrograde. Now I've done a lot of work to kind of utilize that energy in a better way. And there's like a whole another rabbit hole I can go to about that. But certain things will affect you more than others based on your planetary sign or based on your birth chart signs and all the planets and things like that. Another thing is Gemini full moon that we just had, right? That's going to maybe affect me a little bit more than, I don't have a lot of fire in my chart. So like an Aries full moon may not really affect me as much because I don't have any Aries in my chart. I don't have any fire at all, really, except for my Jupiter in Sagittarius. That's like really my only fire placement. At a high level, the full moon, no matter what sign is in, is going to affect everybody, but it will affect people at varying degrees based on how susceptible they are to being influenced by outside energy. Something else is, now that I know how to really protect and kind of shield my energy and not let it get as manipulated by outside energies outside of myself, I can really ensure that the astrological collective energy doesn't affect me as much as it used to. But if you're not really well versed in energy work and how to shield and protect your energy, you are probably going to be affected by the astrological forecast. That's just kind of how it goes. So, and this makes sense, right? If you think about it. So we've all heard, full moons, right? Like people get crazy around a full moon. People didn't just make that up. Like that came from, real life things that people observed. That's like something that can kind of give you a little bit of evidential proof that astrological transits can affect people. The other thing is, the moon. The moon affects the ocean, right? The tides are determined by the moon. So if the moon is affecting the ocean, which is like, we have more ocean than we have land on this earth. We haven't even explored the depths of the ocean, right? Like there's not a lot of research that talks about the ocean floor. So if the moon can affect something as vast, as big, and as powerful as the ocean, it can definitely affect humans, right? Like that should be a no-brainer to really get into your head. Oh yeah, maybe astrology can actually affect me. That really helped me, especially combined with the fact that we are over 80% water. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. It probably varies based on how hydrated you are, but we are about 80% water, maybe more. If the moon affects the ocean water, it's going to affect us because we are mainly water in our body, right? And so yeah, hopefully that kind of sets the foundation of why we have an astrological forecast, why I view it as such, because the astrological transits affect us as humans, and it's always affecting us collectively, right? Because we were all on the earth experiencing the same transits at the same time. So just like in New York City, everyone will be affected by the snow, but it's to varying degrees, right? Depending on if you walk to work or you take the subway or you work from home, right? Just like your chart affects how much the forecast will affect you, the astrological forecast will affect you. Hopefully that all makes sense. So that's kind of the like initial foundation to why it's good to pay attention to the astrological transits. So you want to really, because the motivation behind it, right, is this energy is powerful. It is affecting you. So you want to work with energy versus against it. And if you have the opportunity to really capitalize on this cosmic type of energy that, if you use it correctly, could really benefit you and really give you some extra power, why wouldn't you use it? It's like if you've ever played Mario Kart, when you have you get the mushroom and it allows you to speed up. Gives you a boost so you can pass out other people. I mean, not that we're comparing ourselves to other people necessarily, but you know how you get the mushroom and it speeds you up? That's what can happen if you use the astrological transits to work in your favor. So hopefully that kind of wakens you up to, or opens you up, I should say, to that idea and exploring that further. And try it for yourself. Like, you don't have to just take my word for it. Try it for yourself. Prove it. Prove it to yourself. Get that evidence. So yeah, so that's like the good foundation. And then like going into how I used the new moon and the full moon more specifically, because the new moon and the full moon happen once a month each. So like every 2 weeks, you'll have either a new moon or a full moon, give or take. Sometimes there's 2 full moons in a month or 2 new moons in a month, but that's more rare. The full moon has specific energetic properties. The new moon has specific energetic properties. And so you kind of want to take it a little bit literal in the sense of like, okay, so the new moon is like the beginning of this lunar cycle. So it starts off dark, right? And then more and more light accumulates. The energy builds on the moon, right? It's waxing, growing. So the energy is growing up to the peak, which is the full moon. So that is why people typically recommend manifesting for the new moon, setting new intentions for the new moon, planting seeds, because the energy is growing cosmically, right, in the collective energy. And so if you want something to manifest, something to grow, something to, expand, whatever new intentions you're setting, you want to use it on the new moon because the energetic alignment is there. And again, use that mushroom to speed it up, right? So that's kind of the idea behind that. And then the other piece is the full moon. So the full moon, it's at the peak energy. And then from the full moon on, the energy wanes. So the moon gets more and more dark and the energy dissipates until it resets back to the new moon. And so because the energy is dissipating, it's releasing, that is why for the full moon, you tend to do more shadow work, inner work, more like releasing the old to make space for the new. That's kind of the lunar cycle that you follow with those 2 lunar events. And that's exactly what I did for the entire first year of my spiritual awakening that allowed me to transform my life, which is what I'm sharing and teaching on this podcast today. So now that I kind of just explained the energetic properties of the new moon and the full moon and why you do one type of practice for the new moon and why you do one type of practice for the full moon, I'll go into that a little bit deeper to explain exactly how you can do this yourself. So what you'll do basically, if you you don't have to follow it to a T, but if you want the maximum levels of up level, maximum levels of growth and expansion, you really just with anything that you do in life, if you give your all and you give 100%, you're going to get the best results. So I would recommend personally giving this a try for all of 2026 and just see what happens, right? And if by the end of the year, you're like, I don't need it anymore, fine. Or if you're like, I'll do it whenever I feel really called to, not every full moon, then great. But just try it for 12 months in a row and just see how friggin' awesome it is, okay? And I'll explain why. I'm going to go deeper into the why behind doing this consistently every single month, and then you can decide from there. Every new moon, you're going to build a practice around setting new intentions. So, getting really clear on what you want, right? Getting really specific on what you're calling in. I think there's a lot of power in being really clear and specific on what you want, because I think a lot of times, right, we're living on autopilot. We don't really know what we want unless we sit down and really reflect and think about it. We're going in our day-to-day life and, we might think, oh yeah, I want this, but, you don't really know, because sometimes it's just because you see somebody else has it and they look really happy, or because your parents tell you that you should be doing this and you want to get their approval. A lot of times we do things and we think we want them. We think we're going to be happy when we get them, but we're not, right? So just getting really clear on what you want and the why behind it is just a powerful enough practice on its own. So, and it's kind of just like a goal setting thing in a way, getting really clear on what do I want to call in this month? What do I want to create and achieve this month? you want your overarching goals of 2026, right? Like that's a really powerful practice as well. But you also kind of want to make smaller goals throughout the year for each month, because usually what happens is if we make a big goal that you want to achieve in 2026, you kind of get lost in that because it's so overarching and big picture. You don't really stay as accountable for it throughout the year because it's your year one. It's almost like too big of a time frame. It's really helpful for you, and it almost seems a little out of reach in a way too. So by breaking that overarching goal into smaller monthly pieces of that goal is actually really beneficial from a scientific neuroscience perspective. That is really, really helpful. That's why setting new intentions and manifestation practices with the new moon is really powerful. And then typically what I like to do is look at the sign that the new moon is in. And I would say based on the zodiac sign, that's going to give you like the overall energy and vibe of what this energy is bringing for this new moon, and also what the themes are going to be for you to focus on. So, for example, one of my favorite new moons is the Capricorn new moon. It always happens in January. It's just so fitting for the first new moon of the year because Capricorn is the very like disciplined, long game, successful kind of vibe. Like it's all about putting in the work, being consistent, doing the deep stuff to achieve the big overarching life goals. Like Saturn goes big, but it also plays the long game. It's not doing shortcuts. It's not skipping the habits that it knows is going to make it successful. It's all about discipline and focus and consistency and things like that. That vibe, like if I were going to do a manifestation practice around the new moon in Capricorn, I would get really, really focused on actionable goals, actions for me to take. What habits are going to allow me to be really consistent to reach those goals that I have for the year, or reach whatever, are my overarching goals for January. I would really infuse the energy of that zodiac sign to bring into my manifestation practice. So that's something you really want to do. The other piece of that too that you can use for each month is to look at where you have that sign, that zodiac sign in your chart, what house it sits in, because there's 12 houses in your birth chart. They each represent different areas of life. So it's also really helpful to look at that because you can use that area of life as a focus for what you're manifesting, what you're calling in for the new moon. So for example, I'm a Capricorn rising. So Capricorn sits in my first house, which is the house of self. It's all about, your personality, how you express yourself, your first impressions, how you view yourself, kind of like your self-concept, your self-image in a way. Not entirely, because there's some of that in the second house too, but that's kind of the main thing about the first house. So for the Capricorn new moon, I am probably going to focus on manifesting and setting new intentions around the identity I want to embody in 2026. What does this next level version of me look like? That's kind of how I would play into that. And so what's really cool about this is if you do that for each new moon every single month, you are setting new intentions for every month, right? Which is making you more intentional about what you want, more specific about what you want, because if you don't really know what you want, you can't actually manifest what you want, right? Like, how are you supposed to manifest what you want if you don't actually declare it and get really clear on it? So that's one thing. The other piece is that when you do it every month, the new moon is in a different sign every single month, which is going to be in a different house on your birth chart every single month. So by doing it for all 12 months, you're going to be hitting all 12 houses that whole year, which means you're hitting every single component of your life, reflecting, intention setting, all of that stuff. You're hitting every single part of your life, which is really, really important anyways, because the universe is all about balance. You really You really want to focus on all areas of life. If you are a little bit tunnel visioned and pigeonholed in a certain area, that's going to put you out of balance, and there will be some things that happen as a result of that you might not love. That's a story for another day. Definitely a lesson learned for me. In my spiritual awakening year, I was all about transforming my love life, which was great in some ways, but it also gave me some challenges in other areas of my life after that, which is a story for another day. But anyways, using the astrology new moon practices and full moon practices every month is going to give you that balance of viewing all areas of your life, which is, the universe loves that. You're going to get bonus points for that. So that's great. Okay. So that's my little spiel on the new moon. So that's what I would do every single month. So that's what you can do, right? You can look up your birth chart. Even if you don't really understand all the ins and outs, you can still do this, right? Like, I didn't know as much as I know now, and I still did this. So I was able to look at my birth chart for free. I think it's AstroSeek or astrocharts.com, one of those. You just put in your name, your birthday, your location of birth, not where you grew up, like the hospital, like the city, if you were born in a hospital. So like, for example, I was born at Yale, New Haven, so New Haven, Connecticut. I would put New Haven, and then the time that you were born, which you can find on your birth chart. You're gonna have to ask your parents for that. If you don't have the time, the exact time, there are some workarounds with that, but I could, if you need more guidance on that, I can definitely talk to you about that in the birth chart readings that I do. For now, if you at least have an idea, if you don't have an exact day, that will be really helpful. Like, for example, if you know is at night, you can at least put 8 p.m., 9 p.m. or something like that. It might not be 100% right, but it'll still be pretty close. And the reason for that is because your rising sign is based on like a certain point in the sky at that time. So basically, because your rising sign is also called the ascendant, it is basically, so when you're born, say like, for example, you're born at 9:22 a.m. Wherever that ascendant was in the sky at that point is how you end up being, like me, a Capricorn rising at 29 degrees, right? So that's getting really advanced. But say you didn't know that and you put in 10 a.m., you might still hit the same rising sign, but you might not. You might go into the next one. So that's why get as specific as you can. That's the best bet. So that's kind of that. Also, I don't like this new background, so hold on one second. I'm gonna switch this background. All right, so we're back with my Christmas background. If you're watching this, I did not like the rain background that YouTube gave me as a new recommendation. So anyways, what the heck was I just saying? Oh, so it's going on the whole birth time thing. Anyway, so you get your birth chart, right? Just passing through that rising sign tangent I just went on. You get your birth chart. All you have to do is look at it. So you'll know that the new moon is in Capricorn. All you have to do is you'll see this on the outer end. It'll say Capricorn, and then you look in and you'll see what house. It'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through 12. That's all you really need to know. It could be beneficial if you know that, your Venus is in Capricorn. That could play on things, but as a high level general thing, like, I didn't go that deep. I really just looked at the house and went from there. So that's exactly what you can do. Again, I can definitely help you with this if you want to do a one-on-one reading with me. It's only if you really want to, get the most possible transformative results. You can go deeper by working with me, but you don't need that. That's how I would approach the new moons. The full moons, kind of similar, kind of different. So the practice is going to look different for a full moon, right? Because the energy is dissipating, right? Because I explained the energetic properties before of the full moon. The energy is dissipating, it's releasing. We already passed the peak. So you're going to be doing releasing work on the full moon. So think of it as making space for the new. When the new moon comes along, you're taking out the old, what's not serving you, you're making space. Because just like in your home, right? You can't hoard in your home forever, right? Like, you don't want to be a hoarder. So If you have a closet and you're constantly buying new things without taking out some of the old, it's going to be all stuffed and it's not going to be cute and it's not going to be functional and it's not going to be a good vibe, right? So got to take stuff out to bring in and make space for the new. And so that's exactly what the full moons are for. And so it's really a lot of reflecting work is really more what it is. So kind of like putting into perspective, right? So the Capricorn new moon I was just talking about, I am setting new intentions around the new identity that I want to embody, right? So, well, actually, I guess we can kind of go into, like, we'll use the example of what I really did that first year, right? My first year of my spiritual awakening, I really was frustrated with my love life. And so that was my focus of the year, was really just like completely transforming my love life and manifesting my soulmate. That was my whole like goal thing for that year. So with the Capricorn new moon, I focused on shifting my identity and self-image to be a woman who is lucky in love, because I was unlucky in love before. I had, I don't need to go into my whole story. I have so much information about my story in my first ever episode of my whole love life scenario, but I was unlucky in love, right? I did not have things working out for me. I was attracting really terrible qualities in men. I was manifesting the worst versions of these people. And I wanted to embody a new identity of somebody who is lucky in love, who gets the really good dates, gets the guy that really pursues her, treats her really well, like a princess, a queen, the guys that the type of guy that I'm actually attracted to, not the guy that I feel like I need to force myself to like, right? Like the one that people really wanted to, get into a relationship with versus, the version of me that, liked a guy and then he would not want to be in a relationship, or something like that. We've all been through it, right? So I was calling in a new identity of me with this Capricorn new moon. And so 2 weeks later comes the full moon, right? Which I forget off the top of my head what that would typically be. At the end of January-ish, beginning of February-ish, right? Because it's 2 weeks, give or take. So it's different every year, of course. It's not like it's the same day every year you have that moon, right? It depends on the lunar cycles, which is not even 31 days every month. It's like 28 days, right? So it's not going to be the same day every year. For that upcoming full moon, I would still look at the energy, the zodiac sign of that moon, but I would also look at the house that was sitting in. So, for example, let's think of the Gemini full moon that just happened last week, because that is top of mind for me, why I made this podcast episode in the first place. So the Gemini full moon, Gemini is in my 5th house, the house of kind of like social vibes. It's like a lot of creativity, self-expression, romance, kind of like dating, not like super long-term partnership, marriage. That's the 7th house, but more like dating, like casual dating type of vibes. What I would do for that full moon, knowing it's in the 5th house, is see what do I need to release based on that area of life. That's one way you can approach it, is by looking at the house. But I also found it very beneficial to see kind of what was coming up in my life and being like, what do I need to release? Like, what are the triggers that are holding me back from bringing in my manifestations that I'm calling in for that year, or the ones that I set for the new moon, right? So I could look at the 5th house, right? Like if I think about it, let's see, what did I write down? I'm actually going to look at what I wrote down. This is what I did personally. Like I focused on kind of the self-expression piece, especially with this work that I'm doing in my business. I'm on this podcast, right? A lot of my business is around expressing myself in a way, being seen on, I'm being vulnerable with you guys, and a lot of times on this podcast and in my blogs and just in this work, I am always sharing my personal experiences to teach and inspire you to do the same life-changing transformations for yourself. So I'm being very vulnerable. I'm out here. I'm being seen. And so with a lot of that comes the visibility wounds for fears of being seen, fears of being my authentic self. It's takes a lot of courage to show yourself, be yourself. And, I've been dealing with that a lot, those visibility wounds. And so it was the perfect time for me to focus on doing work around shifting, releasing, rewiring that, because I know that for my next level identity and what I'm calling in, expanding and growing in this business, I need to clear out those visibility wounds so that I can continue to express myself and put myself out there and be vulnerable. Otherwise, I can sabotage that in ways, right? So that's something I would do for the full moon, right? But kind of going back to my initial example of when I was transforming my love life and set the new identity of being lucky in love at the Capricorn new moon. For that full moon, I could look at, what old thoughts and belief systems and habits did I do that don't align with my new lucky in love identity that I'm calling in? What do I need to release to make space for the lucky in love identity? So, you can do a reflection. I usually like to do a brain dump, just a lot of journaling for full moon specifically. And you can for new moons too, like more of a scripting of like kind of calling in, like kind of journaling on like what you want to experience. The full moon's more like brain dumping what's already like in there to get out. So what I would do is be like, all right, well, the unlucky version of me put guys up on a pedestal. I would see a guy that I really liked and I would put a lot of pressure on myself to make sure or get the validation that he liked me back. And that would ultimately, when you do pedestal, that's a whole nother thing that I can talk about another time. Law of pedestals, it's a universal law. When you put something up on a pedestal, you repel it away. So if anybody's familiar with pedestals in dating, putting a guy up on a pedestal, he probably pushed you away and didn't want to date you or ghosted you at some point in time. I'm sure that that's happened because it's a universal law. It happened to me a lot when I had low self-image. It was a lot easier for me to put men up on a pedestal because my self-image was low. I already saw myself at a low bar, so it was very easy for me to put somebody up above myself. So that would be something I would release, right? Is putting people up on the pedestal. I would put myself up on the pedestal. The version of me who's lucky in love, I put myself on the pedestal, right? Like I know that I am valuable, I know I'm special, I know that I'm a gift to whoever I decide to date, I add value to their life. That would be putting myself up on the pedestal. So I know that I would have to release the opposite of putting somebody up on the pedestal, basically. So that's kind of how this lunar cycle situation works. So hopefully my examples help you with that. So basically that's what I would do every single month is I would do the new moon, the full moon. And the reason that this is so great, right, is because you're doing it every month, right? You're consistent with it. You basically have like a cosmically set schedule to do this and be consistent, because if you don't do it either on that new moon or the day before, day after, it's usually like a 3 to 4 day window where the energy is the most potent. You'll miss that energetic window. And yeah, you can do it on your own time, but it's not going to be as powerful, right? Because you don't have the energy of the new moon, that mushroom boost like from Mario Kart to really help you. Will doing those practices without following the lunar cycle still help? Yes, they will. But you don't have that extra boost, so it won't be as transformative. I feel like my life transformed like completely at such an accelerated rate because I used the power of astrology to help add more energy behind these intentions, behind this shadow work, releasing work. It really helped me accelerate, grow, and transform at a way faster pace than if I was not using the astrological forecast and transits. So, and just to really like put that in perspective, if you didn't listen to my story, I went from being unlucky in love, being bedridden post hip surgery in January, to having manifested my soulmate in 6 months by June, who is now my husband. Aside from that, I mean, I had leveled up my self-image like so much. My work life improved, my friendships improved, my confidence and just ultimate fulfillment improved. And I was making more money too, and I got, raises and bonuses and things like that. I even moved. I was like living in my parents' home, and I moved to California, which is like my favorite place in the world. It's my soul's home. I like had attracted a really positive situation with this condo. I basically envisioned the condo in my mind. Like, I completely transformed my life in a matter of 6 to 9 months, like completely unrecognizable. And I really think that using these lunar events was what helped me, because one, I was being consistent by following a set schedule, right? And that's the thing. Yeah, you don't have to follow it, right? But like I said before, it's not going to be as powerful because you don't have the astrological energy on your side. But also, if you're not following the schedule of the moon, it's a lot easier to put off, right? You might be like, oh, on Sunday, I'm going to do my new moon practice, or we wouldn't call it that, right? Because you're not doing the new moon. You would be like, oh, on Sunday, I'm going to do my intention setting practice, setting my goals for the month, setting my manifestations for the month, whatever. And then say on Sunday, you feel tired and you would rather watch Netflix, and you put it off. You're like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. And then you put it off again. You put it off again, right? Especially with the full moon, like type of releasing, inner work, shifting, kind of working through your triggers. That stuff is more uncomfortable, right? As humans, it's a lot easier for us to avoid discomfort. We don't typically run towards the challenging things in life, and the inner work is more challenging, but it's also incredibly beneficial at the same time. So we tend to probably put that off and procrastinate it more. So if you're not following that set schedule, it's probably a lot more likely that you'll put it off. It's not as enticing as the manifesting piece, right? Doing the inner work. It's like, oh, I don't want to face like these things. And a lot of it is subconscious. So it does take a little bit more brain power in a sense to really reflect on things that you aren't super aware of. And so, yeah, you're going to probably put it off. That's why I feel like I was the most consistent when I was following these lunar cycles, because after that first year of my spiritual awakening, I really fell off that second year. Honestly, I wasn't very consistent. I was doing things differently, right, than I did that first year, because I got a little comfortable, transformed my love life, and that was my main thing. So then once my love life was great and I had my soulmate, and I was able to really kind of shift my identity in a permanent way where I didn't have to do as much to really maintain that lucky and love identity. It just became who I was. But so I didn't have like the motivation of transforming my love life to keep me accountable. So I kind of let a lot of things slide, and that next year I was very stagnant. I didn't have much growth. I actually reverted in some ways, not in my love life, but like in other areas, because I wasn't being consistent. I stopped doing the astrology stuff. I stopped doing the inner work and the manifestation work consistently. And yeah, so that's another reason why you want to follow the full moon and lunar cycles and all of that. And then the other piece that I'll say too is when you're first starting all of this work, your personal energy is probably working against you. So to have the astrological energy on your side is also incredibly valuable. And what I mean by that is typically when you kind of have your spiritual awakening, or you first start wanting to work on yourself, you probably have a lot of programming, a lot of unhealed trauma, a lot of limiting beliefs that you haven't worked on yet, obviously, right? Because you're starting this journey, that are working against you to manifest, right? You can't just write down on a piece of paper, oh, I want to manifest my soulmate, and it's going to happen. You have to do a lot of inner work, a lot of healing, rewiring, transforming. You have to do so much more than just manifesting and doing this ritual, this practice on the new moon, or not on the new moon even, so basically your energy is working against you when it comes to manifesting and doing that kind of stuff. So until you kind of get your energy to a better place, it's kind of like going from a lower frequency to a higher frequency, because you're shifting your belief systems to be more higher conscious. You're shifting your belief systems to be more expansive. You're growing. The more that you expand and grow as a person, the higher frequency you become. So yeah, if you're a lower frequency, you have more limiting beliefs, you're not going to be able to transform. So in the beginning, using the power of the astrological energy, the lunar energy, that is going to get you better results until at least you get that energy right? So like I said, I fell off that second year, and now here I am going into year 6 of this work. I have done so much work on my energy. My frequency is so much higher than it was when I first started this work back in 2021. My belief systems are incredibly different, right? So my knowledge of manifestation, of healing, of rewiring, all the neuroscience, the energetic stuff, the energy work, all that stuff, it is so much more advanced that I know other ways that I can still have really effective results outside of the astrological transits and the lunar cycles. So do I still follow this every single month to a T? No, I don't. But sometimes I still like to do it. And I clock how I feel, though. I still always stay up to date on the astrological forecast. I always stay up to date on what the transits are going on. Like when there's like 5-6 planets in retrograde, I'm sure as hell gonna feel it, because usually like I don't feel things as much as I felt before, like I said, because of the energy work that I'm able to do now. But when it's like very powerful energy, I do feel it. So I love staying accountable still to this day. I love still using the astrology energy to work in my favor. So I'm always still going to use it, but I highly recommend, if you're newer to this work, to follow that 12-month consistent protocol that I have laid out today to make 2026 your best year yet and start your full potential journey. And give it a shot. Like, just practice. What do you have to lose, right? Hopefully I explained enough from my own personal experiences, the scientific and energetic properties of all of this that would, make you really open to trying it. And, I'd love to hear if that's the case. But at this point, that is kind of my whole spiel on how astrology transformed my life that first year and how you can do it too. So step by step, basically, here is just kind of the recap, is to get your birth chart from AstroCharts or AstroSeek, and then use it for every new moon and full moon. There's astrological calendars. I think Astrology Cafe has a really good one where you can look up all the dates of the new moons and the full moons, and then you can compare against your chart to see the houses of where it falls in. You can read articles on the different zodiac energies to apply that to each new moon and full moon ritual, and you can create your own unique manifestation intention setting practices or full moon releasing practices. If you want to know more of mine, just comment below and let me know. If you want to get more individual one-on-one tailored support on this, I have my Born to Be Built to Do reading that I shared earlier, so you can get your own very in-depth, tailored, personalized astrological birth chart reading, along with all of my intuitive energy reading channeling, where I connect with your energy, I connect with your higher self, and I help kind of download all of that information on who you are, who you were born to be and what you were built to do in this lifetime. So you'll really get a full download of what traits and qualities really are you at your core, and what's really programmed and unhealed stuff that's not really aligned, and how can you transform and grow, and what would that look like, and what, based on these personality skill sets, how does that help you kind of see what you're supposed to do in this life to reach ultimate fulfillment and live again the life you daydream about, right? So that is my offering that I have that can really change your life. So if you want to do that, I will drop the link for that in the show notes as well. Comment below with any questions. What do you want to hear more based on, everything I shared? I definitely opened a lot of different topics about astrology and manifestation and, a lot of this reflection, spirituality work. So if there's anything else you want to hear about, anything you liked, let me know. I would love to hear it. And then just lastly, I would really appreciate it if you got any value out of this episode whatsoever, if you could follow my podcast, subscribe to my channel if you're watching this on YouTube, rate my podcast 5 stars, share it with a friend. Any of that is all really helpful in putting my podcast out there and contributing to the success of this podcast. In the universal law of fair exchange, I am spending this time, giving you the top tier, best possible knowledge, experience, and value that I possibly can. So I would love if you could do something to help me in return to keep this podcast going and share it with more people to help them transform their lives as well. So yeah, if you could do that, that would be great. I really look forward to hearing from you and talking to you in the next episode. And yeah, talk soon and happy manifesting. And I hope you enjoy the rest of 2025. All right, bye.